Ladies and gentlemen, we need to begin with an uncomfortable truth. Happiness is not something that life simply hands to you. It is not a gift wrapped up and delivered to your doorstep. It is not found waiting passively at the end of the road like some prize for existing. Happiness, if it is real, must be built. It must be constructed through effort, through discipline, through sacrifice, and through responsibility. People often say, "I just want to be happy." But that very statement is deceptive. Happiness is not an isolated state that you can demand, like ordering food at a restaurant. It is a byproduct of something far deeper, of responsibility, of striving, of voluntarily confronting suffering. Life is hard. It is harsh. It is filled with tragedy and limitation. And yet, within that very difficulty lies the raw material for happiness. The human psyche was not designed to live in endless comfort. Comfort feels good in the short term, but over time it corrodes us. We stagnate when we are given everything. Consider what happens when someone wins the lottery. For a brief moment, their life appears euphoric, effortless, perfect. But we know the statistics: most lottery winners, within a few years, end up bankrupt, depressed, or more miserable than before. Why? Because they were handed something they did not build. They were given a counterfeit of meaning without the structure that supports it. Happiness is fragile when it is divorced from effort. That is why so many people today, despite living in material abundance, feel lost, anxious, and purposeless. They are comfortable but not fulfilled. They have entertainment but no engagement. They have distraction but no direction. You cannot buy happiness because happiness is not an object. It is a consequence of becoming. Think of it like building a house. If someone gives you a mansion, it might impress you for a time. But if you built that same house brick by brick, with sweat on your brow, with sacrifice, with planning and persistence, suddenly that house is no longer just a structure. It is an extension of yourself. Every wall tells a story. Every room has meaning. Happiness works the same way. When you build it, it becomes a foundation, not just a decoration. Now let me take this one step deeper. Psychologically speaking, humans are oriented toward struggle. We are wired to seek out problems and overcome them. That is why people voluntarily take on challenges that, on the surface, appear unnecessary. Running marathons, climbing mountains, building businesses, raising children. These things are not easy. They demand sacrifice, suffering, and persistence. And yet, those who engage in them will often describe themselves as fulfilled, sometimes even joyful, despite the hardship. That is not an accident. That is evidence of the truth meaning, and with it happiness emerges from the act of building. And so, when life strikes you down, and it will, when tragedy or failure or betrayal enters your path, you face a choice. You can surrender to despair and curse existence itself, or you can take that suffering, shoulder it, and use it as raw material to construct something greater. That decision, made in the quiet of your heart, is the birthplace of durable happiness. This is not happiness as fleeting pleasure. This is happiness as strength, the kind that stands firm when storms come, the kind that makes you resilient when chaos surrounds you. And it cannot be given to you by anyone else. It must be wrestled from the chaos of life through your own labor. That is why so many of the great traditions, religious, philosophical, psychological, speak of sacrifice, discipline, and responsibility. These are not chains to bind you. They are the very structure that allows you to endure suffering without collapsing. They are the blueprint by which you build a life capable of supporting happiness. So, when you wake up in the morning, stop asking, "How can I be happy today?" That is the wrong question. Instead, ask, "What can I build today that will make me worthy of happiness tomorrow?" If you shift your perspective in this way, happiness will not be something you chase. It will be something that follows you as a natural consequence of your striving. And that, my friends, is the paradox. The harder you work, the more suffering you embrace, the more responsibility you carry, the deeper and more lasting your happiness becomes. Because happiness is not given, it is built. So build. Build with courage, build with discipline, build with faith in the possibility of tomorrow. Because the world does not owe you happiness. But if you build with all your strength, happiness will grow inside you, like light breaking through the cracks of the darkest night. If happiness must be built, as we've already established, then we need to ask the next question: what are the tools by which it is built? And here lies a truth that people often resist, but cannot escape. Discipline is the cornerstone of joy. Now, that might sound strange at first, because we've been taught, especially in our modern world, to equate happiness with ease, with relaxation, with doing whatever we feel like in the moment. The cultural narrative whispers, if you just make yourself comfortable, if you eliminate stress, if you indulge your impulses, then you'll finally be happy. But comfort, pursued endlessly, rots into despair. Why? Because comfort is not the same as joy. Let's imagine this. If you spend your life lying on a couch, eating whatever you want, watching endless entertainment, and avoiding every possible responsibility, you might feel a brief sense of relief. You might even mistake that relief for happiness. But underneath, your soul knows the truth. You're shrinking. You're not expanding your capacity. You're not shouldering responsibility. And the psyche knows when it is betraying itself. That's why people drown in comfort but still feel hollow. Discipline, by contrast, demands the opposite. It is the act of saying no to the easy path so that you can walk the meaningful one. It is waking up when you want to sleep in, working when you'd rather procrastinate, training when you'd rather indulge, studying when you'd rather scroll, staying committed when you'd rather quit. Discipline is restriction, but it is restriction in service of freedom. Because freedom without structure collapses into chaos. But freedom earned through discipline becomes a platform on which joy can flourish. Think of the musician who practices scales for years, tirelessly, endlessly, until their fingers move without thought. That discipline seems dull, repetitive, even suffocating. But what emerges? The ability to create beauty, to move others, to feel joy in expressing something transcendent. That joy was purchased through discipline. Or take the athlete. Hours in the gym, early mornings, strict diets, painful injuries. Discipline carves the body and the mind into something stronger. And then, when the moment of triumph comes, crossing the finish line, lifting the weight, standing victorious, that joy is indescribable. But it would not exist without the discipline that preceded it. Discipline is the invisible architect of joy. Comfort does not have the power to construct anything lasting. It can only numb, but discipline builds, and it builds you into someone capable of standing firmly in the storms of life. Psychologically, this is vital to understand. Human beings derive satisfaction not from ease, but from growth, and growth requires resistance. Just as muscles grow by being torn and repaired, the mind grows by facing challenge and overcoming it. Discipline is what ensures that you voluntarily submit yourself to those challenges, instead of being crushed by them when they arrive against your will. And let's be clear, discipline is not the enemy of happiness. It is the pathway to it. When you impose order on your chaos, when you structure your days, when you align your actions with your higher values, you may not always feel immediate pleasure, but you begin to cultivate deep satisfaction. That is the soil out of which joy grows. If you want to know the difference, look at your own life. Think of a time when you avoided responsibility, when you indulged your impulses. How long did that pleasure last? And then think of a time when you pushed yourself through discipline, when you resisted the urge to quit and instead followed through. What remained afterward? A sense of pride, of competence, of expansion. That is joy, and it lingers far longer than comfort ever could. And here's another layer. Discipline is not just about external achievement, it is about internal integration. When you are disciplined, you align your actions with your values. You stop betraying yourself. You stop living as if you were two people, one who knows what should be done and another who refuses to do it. Discipline unifies you, and that unity is joy because it eliminates the internal war that tears so many apart. So when you push yourself, when you embrace discipline, you are not denying yourself happiness. You are investing in it. You are planting seeds that may take time to grow, but when they bloom, they give you something comfort never can, the sense that your life is meaningful, that you are becoming someone worth being, that your joy is built on the bedrock of effort and not the shifting sands of indulgence, and that, in the end, is the deeper truth. Joy is not the absence of struggle, but the reward for enduring it with discipline. If happiness must be built, and if discipline provides the framework on which it stands, then we must confront another critical reality: your mind itself must be trained. Because even with effort, even with discipline, the mind has a way of sabotaging itself. Left unchecked, it will not naturally drift toward light, it will fall toward darkness. And if you allow that to happen, no amount of external order will save you. You see, the human brain is wired with a negativity bias. Evolutionarily, it made sense. Our ancestors survived by noticing threats, the rustling in the grass, the shadow at night, the face that looked hostile. Paying attention to danger kept them alive. But in our modern lives, where many threats are not physical but psychological, this same bias can turn inward. It magnifies failure, exaggerates loss, obsesses over the one thing we lack while ignoring the countless things we have. If you allow your mind to run automatically, it will drag you downward. That is why happiness is not just a matter of circumstance. It is a matter of attention. Where you place your focus determines the emotional quality of your life. And here lies a profound truth: focus is not automatic. It must be trained just as a muscle is trained through conscious effort. When you discipline your attention, you begin to wrestle control away from despair. Gratitude, for example, is not just a shallow exercise. It is the deliberate act of retraining your mind to notice what is already good, instead of being enslaved by what is lacking. Courage, likewise, is not just a trait, it is the conscious redirection of attention away from fear toward possibility. These acts are small, but repeated daily they restructure the pathways of the brain itself. Neuroscience confirms what the ancient wisdom traditions have always taught: what you attend to, you become. Now, this is not to say you should ignore suffering. No. To deny pain is to live in delusion. The world contains tragedy, betrayal, illness, death. Pretending it doesn't exist is naïve, and worse, it leaves you unprepared when suffering inevitably arrives. But there is a difference between acknowledging the darkness and surrendering to it. You are not powerless. You have the capacity to notice the darkness without allowing it to define you. You can decide, consciously, where to direct your gaze. Think about this practically. Two people can face the exact same tragedy. One crumbles into despair, convinced that life is only cruelty. The other suffers as well, because suffering cannot be avoided, but still sees within that same moment an opportunity for growth, for compassion, for responsibility. What separates them is not circumstance, it is the training of the mind. This is why philosophies, religions, and psychological practices across history emphasize meditation, prayer, journaling, reflection. These are not mere rituals, they are techniques for disciplining attention, for pulling your focus away from the chaos of fear and despair and reorienting it toward order, meaning, and light. And make no mistake, the battle over your mind is the most decisive battle of all. Because if your attention is enslaved by darkness, then discipline feels meaningless and responsibility feels unbearable. But if you train your mind to see even a fragment of light in the storm, then discipline becomes purposeful and responsibility becomes noble. Consider this: every time you wake up and choose to focus on the small good, the fact that you are breathing, that you have one person who cares for you, that you still have another chance today, you are strengthening the muscle of resilience. Every act of attention is a brick in the structure of your mind. Over time, those bricks form a fortress, and when chaos comes, as it always will, you are not easily shattered. So, this is the task: learn to guide your attention. Refuse to let despair dictate your gaze. Notice the darkness, but choose to focus on the light. It is not easy. In fact, it may be the hardest discipline of all. But it is also the one that makes every other effort worthwhile. Because if you can master your mind, you can master the quality of your life. So far, we've established that happiness is not handed to you but built, that discipline is the structure which supports it, and that the mind must be trained to orient itself toward the light rather than the darkness. But even with all of that, there is still a deeper truth to face. Happiness remains shallow and fragile if it exists only for yourself. The most profound form of joy emerges only when you take responsibility for something beyond your own comfort and desires. This is a lesson our culture often resists. We are told, endlessly, to do what makes you happy, to chase self-fulfillment, to treat life as if it were a buffet of pleasures designed solely for our personal satisfaction. But here's the problem: the self is too small a container for real meaning. If everything you do is only about you, then sooner or later, you will discover that it is not enough. The weight of life is too heavy to be carried by a single individual pursuing only their own gratification. And this is where responsibility enters the picture. To take responsibility is to accept willingly that your life is bound up with something larger: your family, your community, your faith, your work, the future itself. Responsibility ties you to meaning. And meaning is what allows you to withstand suffering without collapsing. Think about it this way. Imagine two people facing the same hardship, let's say financial struggle or illness. One says, "Why me? This is unfair. I want an easy life. I don't deserve this." The other says, "I must endure this because others are depending on me. My children need me. My spouse needs me. My community needs me. Even my future self needs me." Which of these two is more likely to summon the strength to keep going? The one who has accepted responsibility, because responsibility transforms suffering from meaningless chaos into purposeful struggle. And here lies the paradox: when you burden yourself with responsibility, life becomes heavier, yes, but it also becomes lighter in another sense, because the weight has meaning. It is precisely in carrying that weight that joy begins to emerge. Responsibility anchors you. It draws you out of the shallow pool of self-interest and into the vast ocean of purpose. Think of parents raising a child. No parent wakes up in the middle of the night to a crying baby thinking, This is fun. It's exhausting, relentless, often thankless. But beneath the exhaustion lies a kind of joy that cannot be replicated anywhere else, the joy of knowing you are building a life, shaping a soul, contributing to something that will outlast you. That joy arises not in spite of the responsibility, but because of it. Or consider those who dedicate themselves to service, whether through teaching, mentoring, volunteering, or creating something that improves the lives of others. Their happiness is not the fleeting thrill of pleasure. It is the deep satisfaction of knowing that their suffering, their effort, their sacrifice is feeding into something greater than themselves. And that kind of happiness cannot be shaken easily because it is rooted not in the self but in the enduring web of meaning. Responsibility also has another function. It protects you from nihilism. Without responsibility, life feels arbitrary. When suffering strikes, as it always does, you have no answer. You fall into despair. But with responsibility, you have a response. You can say, I suffer. Yes, but my suffering is not in vain. It is part of something larger. It is the price I willingly pay for love, for service, for growth, for God. That is why the pursuit of happiness through pleasure alone fails. Pleasure is too fragile. It vanishes in the face of suffering. But happiness that emerges from responsibility is resilient because it is not about avoiding pain. It is about carrying it for a purpose. So if you want to be happy in a way that endures, do not ask, what can I take? Ask instead, what burden am I willing to carry? What responsibility can I embrace that gives my suffering meaning? Because when you answer that question honestly, you will find that happiness arrives not as a goal, but as a companion walking beside you on the road of responsibility.